Since the last time I did a Defender tier list, a lot has changed in Rainbow Six Siege. We've got new operators, massive changes, and much more. All that has affected the meta and how we play Rainbow Six Siege. So in today's video, I'll be going back and making the definitive Defender tier list for Year 9 Season 1. Timestamps will be in the description if you want to skip to a specific operator, and let's go ahead and get into the video. Okay, now before I can go in and start ranking all the defenders, I first want to discuss what each tier means so you understand what I mean when I put an operator in a specific tier. D tier is strictly for operators that I feel are so bad that they need a rework. Typically, this is going to be because their gadget is flawed or because their loadout is flawed in some way. A great example of this is in the attacker tier list video. I put Callie in need rework because of the fact she's stuck on a sniper rifle. I felt that her gadget doesn't make up for that fact, and so she needs some form of rework to help her in that situation. So when I put an operator in the D tier, that doesn't mean that I think that they're too strong and they need a rework. That typically means that they're such a bad operator that I feel like Ubisoft needs to go back to the drawing board. Then for C tier, these are going to be operators that I feel are niche. You can get utility out of them on certain rounds or certain bomb sites, and they can be useful in specific situations. But the situations where they're useful are far outweighed by the times that they're not very useful at all. Then for B tier, these are going to be operators that are slightly more useful than operators in the C tier. They're going to be useful on more bomb sites. They're going to be useful more often. And generally, the situations where they are going to be useful outweigh the situations where they're not useful. Then when you move up to the A tier, these are going to be operators that are just useful every round no matter what. You can pick them on any bomb site and any map and they will be useful and you will get a lot of utility out of them. And then for the S tier are operators that are borderline overpowered. These are going to be operators that I feel like might need a nerf, or at the very least they're just the strongest operators in their category. However, that doesn't mean that every operator in the S tier I feel like needs a nerf. There are some in S tier that I do feel like will need a nerf, but that doesn't mean all of them are. There will be some operators in S tier that are just really strong, but not necessarily overpowered. And anyways, once again, since we're doing alphabetical order like we did last time with the attacker tier list, the first operator of this video is Alibi, and I'm going to be putting her in niche at best. The reason why I feel like Alibi is really niche right now is because she doesn't really bring much utility to her team. Her clones can be useful and can catch attackers off guard and can give you some form of utility, but her gadget is not nearly as strong as other options on this list. And the only reason why most people are bringing her is because she has a shotgun and she has a really good primary weapon. Outside of that, she doesn't have anything that strong at all. So realistically, Alibi is just a selfish pick in this meta because she no longer has a deployable shield, so she really doesn't bring much to the team at all. Then unlike Alibi, Aruni is going to be going in the A tier and the top of A tier. Aruni is an operator that I considered putting in S tier, but I don't think she's as strong as some of the other operators in that tier, so I decided to put her in A tier. But Aruni, you will get utility out of on every bomb site and every map if you pick her. Her passive ability of being able to create rotates or head holes with a single punch is insane, and it can help you a lot in your site setup. And then on top of that, her having access to the DMR with an ACOG, her having a bulletproof camera or barbed wire, and also having her 3 gates that can be useful for dealing with utility from the attackers is incredibly strong. She's one of the best operators in the game in my opinion right now, and you should be picking her way more often. Moving past Aruni, we have Azami, and after the recent nerfs to her, I know she will be somewhat of a controversial operator. I feel like some people might want to put her lower on this list, but I still think Azami is wholeheartedly S tier. Even though after the release of Deadly Omen, Azami's Kibas can be shot to death, I still think that her Kibas are incredibly strong. All that this change really did was limit the areas where you can use her Kibas. You typically have to be playing on your Kibas at all times to be able to justify bringing her, because if you're not, then the attackers will just shoot them and get rid of them. But the situations when the attacker is going to be able to find themselves shooting a Kiba to death is going to be few and far between, because most of the time a defender will swing out and kill them while they're doing that. Now, and Azami's Kibas still perform the same tasks they used to. They provide you a great bulletproof cover around the bomb site, and they can also cut off lines of sight from the attackers. So it's not like her gadget just magically became useless over a single update. Her gadget is still really strong. It's just you're not going to be able to just throw her Kibas to cover a line of sight and just ignore them for the rest of the round. You're actually going to have to play on top of them to ensure that you get the maximum amount of utility out of them. And then on top of her great gadget that you guys all know about, she also has a really good loadout in the form of the ACS-12, which some people are starting to run now, and then the VSN SMG, and then she also has barbed wire on top of that, and a Desert Eagle to help her make rotates or head holes. She's just an overall amazing operator, and trust me, she deserves to stay in S tier. Moving past Azami, we have Bandit, and I think Bandit honestly is going to be going in the B tier for me. Bandit is still a solid pick, and he can be useful on a lot of bomb sites. But the problem with Bandit is that he's just so easily countered these days. And with Cade basically doing his job but better, I rarely find myself needing to pick a Bandit over a Cade. And the reasons for this is just because Bandit's batteries are easier to get rid of with explosives. They're easy to get rid of with Twitch drones. They're easy to get rid of with Brava's gadget. They're easy to get rid of with Maverick. There's just so many operators that can get Bandit's batteries off of the wall that would have a lot harder time getting Cade's Electroclaws off of a wall, that I just rarely find myself picking Bandit over a Cade. But that doesn't mean that Bandit's not useful. Bandit can be useful, especially when you're bandit tricking with him. That's probably his strongest scenario, is when you're actually actively bandit tricking with him. But most of the time, people aren't using him for that. Now, the one advantage that Bandit does have over Cade is the fact that he has a way better weapon in the form of the MP7, but I don't think that is enough to warrant him going any higher on this list, so I'm going to be putting him in the B tier. Moving past Bandit, we have Castle, which I think is also going to be joining Bandit in the B tier. And the reason why I think Castle is a B tier operator is because he can be really useful with specific site setups and on specific maps. But if you're not used to running a castle, or you just don't know the strategies for castle will actively hurt your team. So you have to know what you're doing when you're playing castle. But if you know what you're doing and you have a good strategy with him and he's on a map where he's strong, he is really useful. And the reason why I talk about Castle like he's such a strong operator is because he has 4 castle barricades that can cut off line of sight from the attackers and that waste utility from the attackers. He has access to a bulletproof camera or prox alarms, and he has a secondary shotgun that can help him set up the bomb site, make rotates, all of that good stuff. So all of that on top of him having an ACOG on the UMP makes him a really solid operator to pick in your lineups. Just make for sure you know what you're doing and that you have some really good strategies already in mind when you pick him. Because if you're just willy-nilly putting around castle barricades, then you're probably going to end up screwing over your team more than you're actually going to help them. Moving past Castle, we have Caveira, and Caveira is definitely going to be going in the need rework tier. Caveira is just in a terrible state right now. Her weapons are really weak. Her gadget does a function that's very easy to deal with because there's drones, there's Deimos now, there's so many other operators that can help you deal with a Caveira that she's just deserving of the D tier. I feel like they either need to go back to the drawing board on her gadget and give her some buffs in some capacity, or they need to give her a better weapon so that way she can actually compete with some of the other defenders on this list. Another operator that's going to be joining Caveira in the D tier is Clash. And the reason why I think Clash needs a rework is because I think fundamentally she's just not a very healthy operator for the game. A lot of people find her annoying to go against, and that's not because she's strong, it's just because the way she works, she requires a lot of strategy from your team to be able to clear a Clash. And if you're not working together very well, which is what happens a lot in solo queue, you can struggle to deal with a Clash, or sometimes just outright get destroyed by Clash. And the fact that Clash can just deal free damage to your team, slow them down, all while just sitting behind her shield, makes a lot of players feel like it's just an unfair situation. And so because of that, I do think she needs to go in the need rework. But don't take that as me saying that Clash is super strong, because she's not. Trust me, if you don't know what you're doing with Clash, a lot of the times you're just going to end up losing the round for your team because you're going to have one less gun on your team. And also with Clash, especially in higher ranks, it's super easy to deal with her. Your team, all they have to do is really coordinate with like a Zofia, and you're pretty much dead guaranteed. And most people are just going to steamroll you, which is why I have her in the bottom of D tier. In lower ranks, she can be useful, but this tier list is obviously not from a lower ranks perspective, so that's why I'm not putting her any higher than this. Moving past Clash, we have Doc, and Doc is going to be going in the B tier because I consider Doc to be actually a pretty solid pick in the current meta. Doc has access to the MP5 with an ACOG, which is pretty solid actually. Obviously this gun statistically isn't very good, but with an ACOG it gets a lot better because it's easier to hit headshots and stuff. And then on top of that, he has the Bailiff, which allows him to set up the bomb site for his team. He has barbed wire, and then his stims can actually be useful in rounds. Obviously healing operators are going to be a very contentious topic because with one shot headshot being in the game, it's very hard to justify bringing a healing operator, because if you just get headshot, then your gadget's never going to get used. So one shot headshot being a thing does hurt healing operators, but I still think even with one shot headshot being in the game, Doc stims can be useful, and they are useful in more rounds than they aren't useful. And then that combined with all of the other parts of his kit kind of makes me want to put him in the B tier. Then after Doc, another operator that's going to be going in the B tier alongside him is Echo. And the reason why I say Echo is a B tier operator is because he's definitely not useful in every round. Echo is only useful on very niche bomb sites and in very specific situations. And the reason why is because to play Echo, it requires you to be very active on cams, which means in a lot of rounds, you're taking a gun away from your team to sit on cameras, which can be useful. but sometimes that can end up screwing over your team more than it can help them. And then on top of that, Echo's drones are very easy to spot. So a lot of the times the attackers can just end up shooting them before you ever even get any utility out of them at all. So you have to play very smart and passive with Echo's drones as well. If you use Echo as an operator to support your roamers, in my opinion, he's really good. But if you're using him as a planted out operator, he's even more niche than he would be if you're actually using him to support your roamers. But I will say Echo having access to a deployable shield and 2 really good weapons does help him on this tier list. However, an operator that doesn't provide much utility to their team at all is Ela. And Ela is going to be going in the C tier for me. The simple reason for this is because Ela's gadget is just significantly worse than most other trap operators in the game. Her guns are not nearly as good as some of the other trap operators in the game, and the only thing she really provides to her team that other trap operators don't is a deployable shield. But Frost also has that, and she has a way better gadget and way better guns. So for me, I think you should just steer clear of Ela in most situations, and that's why I'm putting her in the C tier. Moving past Ela, we have Fenrir, and Fenrir is arguably the strongest trap operator in the game, which is why he's going to be going in the S tier. Fenrir having 5 F-Knots at the time of recording, 3 of them being able to be active at the same time, and then him having access to the Bailiff, MP7, and Barbed Wire just gives him so much utility to provide to his team. He can give info to his team when his traps get triggered. He can use his traps to play aggressively and pick up some frags, and because his gadgets are bulletproof when they're not activated, he can actually end up wasting some utility from the attacking team as well. All of this combines to make Fenrir one of the strongest operators in the game, and it's also why he's one of the most banned as well. Moving past Fenrir, we have Frost, and Frost is going to be going in the A tier for me. The reason why Frost deserves A tier in my eyes is because she has a deployable shield, which is pretty rare on operators these days, a secondary shotgun, and her gadget, the Frost Mats, can actually still be really useful on windows, especially if you're playing aggressive on them. Now, because of the recent nerf to Frost, where attackers can just revive themselves out of her Frost Mats, she does have to play somewhat near her traps, and if she doesn't do that, then the attackers will just revive right out of her traps. Now, despite this fact, I still think her traps are really strong because of the fact that they just instantly down an attacker, and at the worst, they're going to lower them to 20 HP, which is a pretty big deal. And they also have a huge debuff if they revive themselves out of the Frost Mat. So all of that combines to make Frost Mats still really strong if you can't play directly on them. And then her having access to the 9mm C1 with an ACOG also helps her on this list as well. Another operator that's going to be going in the A tier alongside Frost is Goyo, and the reasons for this are pretty obvious. Goyo has 4 canisters that can burn a ridiculous amount of time. He has the Vector with an ACOG now, and he also has procs alarms or impacts, which is a pretty big deal as well. So as long as you're putting your Goyo canisters in the right spots, you're going to be wasting a ton of time from the attackers, and you're going to be able to do all of that while having a really good gun at your disposal. Another operator that's going to be joining Goyo and Frost is going to be Jager, and he's going to be going in the A tier as well. Now, the reasons for this are pretty obvious. Jager's placement hasn't really changed much over the past few years. Jager is just really strong simply for his gadget. It has nothing to do with anything else in his kit. At the time of recording, Jager has access to observation blockers and I believe a bulletproof camera, which isn't that great for secondary gadgets. There are much better options that other operators have access to. And then on top of that, Jager's weapon, the 416, is one of the worst damaging ARs in the game. So you're stuck on a bad weapon with bad secondary gadgets. But what makes up for all of that and allows him to be in the A tier is the fact that his ADSs are so damn strong for dealing with projectiles. Each ADS can destroy 1 projectile at a time, and then they have to reload, and then after they've reloaded, they can then shoot another projectile. And with Jager having 3 ADSs, this means that Jager's ADSs can burn 3 pieces of utility before having to reload. This is a pretty huge deal, and Jager has been at the top of the R6 meta for years due to how strong his gadget is. And so because of how strong his ADSs are, I do think he's worthy of the A tier, but just keep in mind that he does have some pretty horrible downsides compared to other operators in the A tier. Moving past Jager, we have Cade, and Cade is also going to be going in the A tier. The reason for this is because Cade is basically just Bandit but better, and you need to be able to electrify walls and hatches in pretty much every round, so Cade is going to be your go-to option for that. Cade being able to get a hatch or 3 walls with a single Electroclaw is pretty huge. And considering how hard Electroclaws are to spot, it makes them really difficult to get rid of as an attacker. Then on top of that, Cade has access to the TCSG with an ACOG, which is really strong, or the mediocre AUG A3 SMG, which is decent, but compared to the TCSG, I think the TCSG is better. And then on top of that, he has access to a Nitro Cell. So considering how good his loadout is, on top of having a really strong gadget, I do think Cade is worthy of A tier. Now moving past Cade, we have Kapkan, and Kapkan is also going to be going in the A tier. The reason for this is because his traps are just really strong in ranked. A lot of the times in ranked, the attackers just won't drone well enough to spot your Kapkan traps, or they'll drone them early in the round and just forget that they exist. And so you can end up picking up some pretty free kills for your team by just picking Kapkan and putting your traps in the right spot. And being able to pick up kills with a trap is a pretty big deal, because eliminating one attacker from the game entirely just because they walk through a doorway is a pretty big deal. Now, obviously, you are making a huge gamble with Kapkan, because if the attackers don't attack the side that you've set up your Kapkan traps on, then you've kind of picked an operator just for their gun and their secondary gadget. But generally, I do think Kapkan is strong as long as you put your Kapkan traps in the right spots. Now, moving past Kapkan, we have another S tier operator in the form of Lesion. And Lesion, in my opinion, is probably one of the most obvious operators worthy of the S tier right now. He has insanely strong traps that can provide his team with a ton of intel, and that can also deal some pretty heavy damage to the enemy team. He has a really good gun in the form of the T5. He has a secondary shotgun to help set up the site, and he has access to a BP or impact grenades depending on what you want to bring. All of that makes Lesion an absolute beast when it comes to setting up the bomb site, and it makes him one of the best roamers in the game, because having access to the T5 and traps that can watch your back while roaming is a pretty big deal. So I don't think anyone's going to be arguing with me on the fact that Legion's S tier. Moving past Lesion, we have an operator that I had a hard time ranking on this list, but I think I'm settled on where I'm going to place him, and that's Maestro. And Maestro, I think I'm going to be putting in the B tier. Maestro is a very tough operator to rank right now because he is really strong, but he's just heavily countered by a ton of operators. So it's very hard to place him on a tier list. His Maestro cameras are unironically some of the best intel gathering gadgets in the game. However, like I said, they're countered by so many operators. Brava can deal with his Maestro cams pretty easily. Flores can deal with his Maestro cams. Sledge can deal with his Maestro cams. Any sort of explosive utility can deal with his Maestro cams. So the attackers just have a wide range of options to get rid of his Maestro cams. And then on top of that, they can just walk up and melee the glass to make the Maestro cams not usable. You can still tase people with the Maestro cam, but the glass will be shattered, meaning you won't be able to see anyone on the camera until you open up and make the Maestro camera vulnerable. All of these counters make the situations where Maestro's gadget is actually useful pretty rare. But when you can get utility out of Maestro's gadget, a lot of the time it's a lot of utility. And you have to keep in mind that he gets 3 of these cameras, which is pretty big. I mean, he used to only have 2 of them. Now he has 3, which is a massive difference. And him having access to the Alda LMG, one of the best weapons on the defense, and a bailiff to help his team set up the site, and barbed wire to cover, you know, the team's back or to watch a staircase or something. All of that combines to make Maestro a really, really good operator for bringing utility to his team. You just have to keep in mind that he has a lot of counters, and he also has the same drawbacks as Echo, which is that he has to sit on his cams a lot of the round, which means you're taking a gun away from your team. But most of the time, I do think Maestro is a solid pick. Now, moving past Maestro, we have another operator that I struggle to rank somewhat, and that is Melusi, but I think Melusi is worthy of the bottom of V tier. After her recently getting an ACOG on her MP5, I don't think her weapons are nearly as bad as they used to be. And then on top of that, her Banshees can be useful on certain maps and on certain bomb sites. And her having access to impact grenades can be a pretty big deal as well. But I kind of just look at Melusi as a middle of the road defender. The reason for this is because her Banshees are very easy to deal with if your team is coordinated. All you have to do is really use an explosive on it or walk into it and shoot it, which now it opens really quickly, so it's very easy to counter. And then her not having access to a secondary shotgun also hurts her pretty significantly. So realistically, you're only picking Melusi for the mediocre Banshees and impact grenades, but I do feel like in most situations, picking another operator would be better. So because of that, I feel like in most situations, picking another operator would be better, but it's not like picking Melusi is a bad idea. It's not going to hurt your team in any way. And she's not as bad as someone like Ella or Alibi, which is why I decided to put her in the B tier. Then after Melusi, we have Mira, and I'm going to be putting her in the A tier. I don't think Mira is S tier anymore, simply for the fact that her gadget can be countered by Ashe, which is one of the most picked attackers in the game. All Ashe has to do is get near her mirror window and then shoot it with an Ashe charge, and then it shatters the mirror window and it's left basically useless. And trust me, this happens in a lot of rounds, a lot more than you'd think. Now, in some situations, you can end up swinging the Ashe and killing her before she can get rid of your mirror windows. But for the most part, Ashe is going to be able to get rid of your mirror windows pretty easily. And then there's also a ton of other operators that can deal with your mirror windows. Like any sort of vertical play deals with your mirror windows. Twitch deals with your mirror windows. So I don't think Mira is nearly as strong as she used to be, but she's still a very strong operator, don't get me wrong. She completely changes the way a lot of the bomb sites are played in the game. And so because of that, you have to put Mira high on the tier list. But I don't think she's worthy of S tier simply for the fact that she is more countered than she used to be. Moving past Mira, we have Mozzie, and Mozzie is going to be an easy A tier for me. Mozzie being able to counter drones and give his team additional intel by hacking the drones is a pretty big deal. And then on top of that, he has access to 2 really good weapons in the form of the Commando or the P10 Roni, and he has access to a Nitro Cell. All of that just makes him a really solid roamer. He's a really popular roamer in the game right now for that reason. And if you're going to pick a roamer in Rainbow Six Siege right now, I do think Mozzie is a really solid option, which is why I'm putting him in the A tier. Moving past Mozzie, we have arguably one of the strongest defenders in the game right now, Mute. And Mute is easily going in S tier for me. He basically does Mozzie's job, but better, which is countering drones. And then on top of that, he has access to the shotgun SMG-11 combo that is so popular in Siege, which allows him to set up the site for his team. And then on top of that, have the SMG-11, which is one of the strongest weapons in the game. And he has access to a Nitro Cell, which is a pretty big deal. And also another benefit of Mute over Mozzie is the fact that Mute can also, in situations where you desperately need some form of wall denial, he can use his Mute jammers as a makeshift form of wall denial. So Mute being able to deny walls, being able to counter drones, and on top of that, set up the entire bomb site for his team makes him easily an S tier operator. Moving past Mute, we have Oryx, and Oryx is going to be going in the top of C tier, and I don't think I really need to explain much of why that is. Oryx relies heavily on maps that have a lot of hatches because of his ability to jump up them. So if you're playing a map that doesn't have a lot of hatches or a lot of vertical play, then Oryx is not really going to be a roamer you're going to want to be picking. And solely for that reason, he's going to be going in the C tier. He does have good guns, and he can set up the site for his team because of the fact that he can just ram through walls and stuff. But overall, I still think he has to go in the C tier just for the fact that he's super map reliant. And the same thing applies to Pulse, which is why he's going to be going in the C tier as well. Pulse relies on maps and bomb sites where you can play below. If you don't have a map that has a lot of vertical play, or you're not on a bomb site that has soft floors below it, then Pulse is not going to be nearly as useful as he would be on another bomb site. This is why you see Pulse a lot on maps like Cafe and Consulate, but you don't see him a lot on other maps. It's simply for the fact that those maps have a lot of vertical play, but other maps just don't have a lot of vertical play in comparison. Then after Pulse, another operator that's going to be going in the C tier is Rook. The reason why Rook is going to be going in the C tier is because he has a similar problem to Doc, which is that he relies on the healing mechanic in Siege, which in a game with one-shot headshot, being able to get utility out of a healing operator is pretty rare. But on top of that, his Rook armor just doesn't provide as much of a benefit, in my opinion, compared to Doc stems. If you didn't know, Rook's armor gives his entire team the ability to self-revive off of the ground. And on top of that, his armor guarantees that any defender will go down if they're not headshot. This can be a pretty big deal, but the animation of Rook's armor is a long one. And when you have Rook armor on, you make a loud audio cue when you go down, revealing to the enemy team that you have Rook armor. So the only time where Rook armor is actually going to be useful for you is when you go down behind significant cover, which most of the time when you're going down, you're not going down in a safe position. Most of the time you die in Rainbow Six Siege or go down because you got caught in a bad position. So a lot of the times when you go down, you're just going to get shot immediately after you go down, which means you're not going to get any use out of Rook's armor. And so because of that, Rook is going to be going in the C tier. Moon past Rook, we have Smoke, and Smoke is going to be going in the top of A tier for me. I don't think Smoke is strong enough to warrant going into the S tier simply for the fact that he no longer has a shield. Smoke is still really strong and still provides a lot of utility to his team. He has the shotgun SMG-11 combo that Mute has, which means he can set up the site, and he also has the, access to one of the strongest weapons in the game. And then he has access to, I believe, barbed wire as a secondary gadget, or at least the main one that most people run, which allows him to, cover a staircase or something like that. But compared to the deployable shield, this just isn't nearly as good. And a lot of the times when you're playing Smoke, you want to be playing behind a deployable shield of some sort. This is why the deployable shield was so popular on Smoke, and it's why it was such a big deal on Smoke, because Smoke's gadget directly benefited from having a deployable shield. Now, if you want to have a deployable shield, you have to pick a second operator, which a lot of the times isn't that big of a deal, because if you just bring a Frost or something like that, you get a deployable shield out of her. But I still think that him losing the deployable shield was a significant hit to his versatility, and so that's why I'm putting him in the A tier. He's still good every round. He's just not on the same level as some of the other operators in S tier. Moving past Smoke, we have Solis, and I think Solis is a pretty obvious S tier, and I don't really know if I need to explain much about it. She has the ability to see the attackers through walls when they're on their drones. She can see the attackers' drones through walls with her gadget, and she can see pretty much any form of electronic utility that the attackers place down as long as her gadget is active. Being able to have that much info on the defense is huge. She's basically just IQ on steroids, but on the defense, an ability like IQ's is way stronger than it is on the attack. Also, her weapon loadout, having access to the P90 and the SMG-11, is really big, and her having access to impact grenades allows her to potentially play below and counter a plant from under the bomb site. So her entire kit, on top of the fact that her gadget is extremely strong, is the reason why she's going in the S tier. Moving past Solis, we have a somewhat controversial operator in the form of Tachanka, and he's going to be going in the need rework for me. The reason why Tachanka needs a rework is because of how situational his gadget is. You can very rarely get utility out of his gadget. Tachanka does have two really strong weapons in the form of his LMG and the VSN with, I believe, an ACOG now. And so don't get me wrong, Tachanka does have some solid weapons, and him having the deployable shield is a pretty big deal too. But his gadget is so terrible that he deserves to go in the need rework tier. The reason for this is because pulling it out takes a really long time, reloading it takes forever as well, and then on top of that, when you actually shoot his gadget and fire starts getting deployed, the attackers can just run straight through it because it doesn't deal a lot of damage to them and it doesn't last a long time, and on top of that, its area of effect isn't that big either. So Tachanka's gadget a lot of the time actually gets him killed more often than it helps his team, because he'll have his gadget out, he'll start shooting his fireballs at a doorway or something like that, and then the attackers will just run through and kill him while his gadget is out. And he won't have time to switch to his weapon because switching from his gadget to his weapon takes a decent amount of time. And also the new ADS changes does technically hurt Tachanka because now switching from his weapon and then ADSing takes longer. So all of these flaws with his gadget just kind of combines to make him worthy of the D tier. The same thing applies to Thorn in my opinion. Thorn is also going to be going in the D tier simply for the fact that her gadget just is terrible. Her Razor Bloom gadgets are basically only useful for intel. They very rarely are going to get you kills. The only time her gadgets will get you kills is when they're in conjunction with something else. Like for example, the attackers are walking through barbed wire and they get hit by a Razor Bloom. Or if the attackers are caught in a Melusi gadget and there's a Razor Bloom on the ground next to it. Or if the attackers get downed into a Frost Mat and there's a Razor Bloom next to the Frost Mat. Those are situations where your Razor Blooms might be able to get you kills. But most of the time, they're just going to go off, the attackers are going to move out of the way, and they're going to blow up and deal no damage. Because of this, Thorn arguably has the worst gadget out of any of the trap operators in the game. Now, she does have access to a deployable shield, and her SMG is decent, but having access to a decent SMG and a deployable shield does not make you a good operator. And so because of that, she's got to go in the D tier. Then after Thorn, another operator that's going to be going in the D tier is Thunderbird. And I know console players might find this kind of surprising, but on PC, Thunderbird is basically useless. She has the same problem that Doc and Rook have, except her gadget is even worse than both Doc and Rook. Thunderbird's gadgets are stationary heal stations, which means you have to actually move across the map to go get the heals if you want them. Thunderbird's not like Doc, where she can go across the map and, actually deliver the heals to her team. You as the defender who needs heals has to run all the way back to the bomb site, go to the Kona station, and then get healed. Then once you get healed by a Kona station, they have to reload for a significant amount of time. And each Kona station only gives you, I believe, 30 HP, which means that even if you walk into all 3 Kona stations, you won't get healed to full HP. This combined with the fact that unlike with Doc, with Thunderbird, you're very rarely going to be able to get revives off with her gadget because, once again, they're stationary, and a guy who goes down is not going to be able to crawl to a Kona station. And so all of these situations just make Thunderbird a very niche operator in comparison to someone like Doc or Rook. Now, she does have access to a really good weapon in the form of the spear, and she does have a nitro cell. But as I said earlier with Thorn, having access to a good gun and a good secondary gadget doesn't make up for having a terrible gadget. And so because of that, I do think Thunderbird is in desperate need of a rework. They need to go back to the drawing board and do something about her gadget to make it actually useful in high ranked play. Moving past Thunderbird, we have Valk, and Valkyrie is going to be an easy S tier. I've talked about this pretty much every time I do a defender tier list of any capacity. Valkyrie being able to give her team 3 additional cameras is huge. Intel in Rainbow Six Siege is one of the most important things. And on the defense especially, being able to have access to 3 additional cameras is just a major deal. Now, Valkyrie is countered by a large range of operators like Brava, Dokkaebi, etc. But even though she's countered by a large amount of operators, being able to find her gadget is very difficult. This is because Valkyrie's cameras are very small, and they also only emit a very minor blue light, which makes them very difficult to see, especially if you place them in the right spots. This combined with the fact that Valkyrie has the MPX, one of the lowest recoil weapons in the game, and a nitro cell makes her one of the best operators in the game in almost every round. Now moving past Valkyrie, we have Vigil, and Vigil is going to be going down in the C tier, and we'll put him at the top of C tier. The reason why Vigil is going to be going in the C tier is because Vigil's gadget is designed to hide him from drones. And that's kind of his whole thing, is that he can hide himself from cameras and also drones. However, since when Vigil's gadget is active, the drones can visibly see that it's active on the bottom of their screen. This makes Vigil very hard to get utility out of, because as you get closer to Vigil with your drone, you can see the lines on the bottom of your screen get bigger and bigger, which means you can kind of pinpoint his location on your drone. And then on top of that, you can still hear the audio of Vigil in your drone. You just can't see him. This means that if you're going up against a high elo team in ranked, a lot of the times your gadget's just not going to do anything as Vigil. They're just going to be able to pinpoint where you are once they get one drone near you, and they're just going to be able to slam you. And Vigil does have access to good guns, and he does have access to impact grenades, which can be useful for a roam, but I think relying on his gadget as a counter to drones when you're roaming is just a bad idea. You should be picking someone like Mozzie or Solis if you're going to roam, not Vigil. Vigil has fallen off drastically over the past few years because of how many other operators do his role better. And so because of that reason, he's got to go in the C tier. He's very rarely going to be bringing a lot of utility to you. Okay, now next up on our list is Wamai, and Wamai is another easy S tier. Wamai basically is just Jager, but better. And the reason for this is because he has access to two of the best guns in the game. He has the MP5K with an ACOG, and he also has the AUG AR on the defense. On the attack, obviously the AUG AR is not nearly as good, but on the defense, it's a pretty big deal. Then he has access to impact grenades to help his team set up the bomb site, or proximity alarms to, hold off the flank or something. And then obviously the biggest reason why he's up here in the S tier is because of his magnets. Wamai's magnets allows him to capture projectiles from the attackers throughout the round. Now, the one downside to Wamai in comparison to Jager is that Wamai's gadget doesn't destroy the enemy projectiles, it just captures them, which means that if an attacker throws a flashbang at you or something, the Wamai magnet will still set off the flashbang. It'll just drag it to its location. This compared to Jager's ADSs, where they just outright destroy projectiles, this can be a pretty significant difference. However, since Wamai has so many magnets throughout the round, he most of the time ends up capturing more projectiles than Jager, and he gets access to better guns. So because of that, I think Wamai deserves S tier wholeheartedly. Now moving past Wamai, we have Warden, which Warden is going to be going in the top of C tier. I still think Warden is useful, which is why I'm putting him in C, but I just think the situations where he is useful has kind of fallen off a little bit. The reason for this is because Warden's gadget relies on the enemy team bringing either a lot of flashbangs, a lot of smoke grenades, or a Ying. Those are the situations where Warden's going to be really strong. That, or when they bring a blitz. This is because Warden's eyeglasses allows him to see through smoke and also just counter flashbangs outright. However, the situations where you're going to be able to get utility out of that are few and far between, because you're relying on the attackers bringing something that they might not bring. I will say Warden having access to a deployable shield does help him a lot, because having a deployable shield is a pretty big deal in the current meta because a lot of operators don't have them anymore. But considering when there's an operator like Frost that has a deployable shield and so much other utility on top of that, I just really don't see a situation where picking Warden is necessary. You should only really be picking him when you know the enemy team is going to be bringing like a Glass or a Ying. Now moving past Warden, we have Tubarao, and Tubarao is going to be going in the top of A tier. The reason why I'm putting Tubarao in A tier is because his gadget being able to just outright stop the attackers from breaching a wall is pretty huge. And also his gadget has the added benefit of being able to slow down the attackers. And so if you're dealing with like a Monty or a Blitz, you can throw down one of his canisters to kind of stop them from aggressing towards you. But the biggest reason why he's so strong is because of the fact that he can just outright counter a breach. If you time his canisters properly, you can throw down a canister onto a wall before a Thermite's charge is able to get the wall open, or before an Ace charge is able to get the wall open, and they'll have to sit there and wait for 30 seconds until the canister burns out. And at the time of recording, Tubarao has access to 3 of these, which means he can burn a minute 30 off of the round. Then on top of that, he has access to the AR-15 DMR that Maverick has on the defense, which is a pretty big deal, or the MPX. And he also has access to a nitro cell. All of this just makes him a really well-rounded operator, and a really strong one at that. The only reason why I don't have him in S tier is because there are certain bomb sites where he's less useful than others. And so because of that, I don't think he's worthy of the S tier. But if you pick him in a round, most likely you will get some form of utility out of him because of how strong his gadget is. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. Also, I recently started a variety channel where I'll be posting content outside of Siege, so if you're interested, I'll have a link in the description for you to go check it out. Now, if you want to watch another video just like this one, it'll be popping up on your screen right now. Also, if you want to watch a video from my variety channel that I just mentioned, a video from that channel will be popping up on your screen now as well. Hopefully you all found this video useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.